to visit me and ask me about classified material. What should I say? How should I deal with that? I want to plan that and think that through a little bit.
But is this a name that's, it's out in the open?
It is out in the open, but nobody really understands to go find it. Except until now, I just told you.
We have a long list of actions that we should be taking. One of which is, for example, contacting Dr. Ray, REA.
There's a lot of names in these documents.
That's right.
Right, and then the 93rd Technical Services Unit, I have their complete roster. These are the people that recovered the wreckage from Roswell, according to the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. Detachment 3 ran around, picked up all the wreckage and so forth. There's 160 some odd names of privates, sergeants, PFCs, so forth, that were responsible. And I've found 30 of them on the internet, on Yahoo search, people search. And I've started to call some of them. And the question is finding the people that are in Detachment 3. Some of them have recalled, yeah, I was in New Mexico, I was there, but not talking about anything unusual. It's like, I picked up rocket debris all summer long. That's what happened to me. That was one case, and we have probably another 20 witnesses that can be researched that are easy before you start getting the names that are exceptionally difficult to find.
It clearly gave the coordinates of landing zone 2. And my first question is, I wonder where that is. I said, Ryan, do you have a topo map to go look? And so he did.
I got several copies and mailed them to all my friends. And sure enough, about 800 feet or so from the Trinity burst is this longitude-latitude coordinate. And then the challenge is, well, we need an aerial photograph of this particular site. And what we found was, I went to the Whittier Archives in Southern California and went and found aerial photography of the Trinity burst site. And this is the Trinity burst site in the center with a fence around it. This is dated September 23rd, 1948. You'll notice in the lower left there's also a small circle and a round zone around that. And that is the coordinates of LZ2. And I found this particular picture before the summer drops happened at all. I mean, like March or April of this year. And then later in the summer, we got a picture in a separate envelope that was this picture. And this picture is a leaked photograph from source S1 that shows a Trinity burst, a little 100-meter thing, and then a clear zone in that lower left-hand corner that has, more trampling and a bigger security circle around it. And so it's very interesting to note these two particular photographs, clearly showing that something happened. The next photograph we want to get is the one that's dated, June 30th, 1947, that there was nothing there.
If the Majestic 12 documents turn out to be the real thing, then clearly elements of the United States Air Force will have had a prominent role in any decision-making process. Over the past 50 years, many Air Force pilots have submitted their own official accounts of UFO encounters. But it's not just military pilots who have attracted the keen interest of American researcher Richard Haynes. His interviews with civilian pilots and flight attendants have helped Richard amass a personal data bank comprising of over 3,000 UFO pilot reports. It is, by far and away, the largest collection of its kind in the world.
And I began this level of work back in the 60s, 1960s, when I was doing research for NASA, and had an opportunity to meet a lot of pilots. And so it's an important area, and I continue to collect data I have over 3,000 cases now, very good cases. But I'm trying to specialize in electromagnetic effects. Some transient change in flight director, altimeter, compass, VORs, onboard electronic systems that only change their behavior when there is the presence of some strange phenomenon near the airplane.
Is this something that has stemmed from a result of actually analyzing the data and looking for specific patterns?
Partly. As a psychologist, I'm very concerned with the entire testimony. And what that means is not just the words that are used, but the presentation of those words, nonverbal communications, the engineering aspects, what the pilots tell me. So I've had to study a lot about aeronautical systems, aeronautics in general, so that I can put it in context and try to draw conclusions, not just from the patterns, which are important, but from specific details.
Yeah. Your background as somebody who began this interest working with NASA, what were you actually doing with the space agency at that time, back in the early 60s?
I was directing a laboratory called the High Luminance Vision Laboratory, which was basically a space simulation. And I could simulate the way objects look to the astronauts in outer space. And this was done for rendezvous and docking purposes, for Gemini, Project Gemini. And during that research, I came to discover that I could set up an optical situation in my laboratory. It was a clean room, before there were clean rooms. And there was a solar simulator for realistic sunlight as it exists in space. And I could set up a target situation that could totally fool the observer. And I was surprised at that. I didn't expect that that could happen. But by controlling the optical variables, I discovered that I could fool you. I could make you see anything I wanted you to see practically. I could change shape, color, size, intensity, orientation, distance. And so I said to myself, I can explain UFOs. They're just misidentified natural phenomena. And I think as a skeptic, I set out to disprove the whole thing. Well, it wasn't very long before I found out that I was wrong. I couldn't explain everything that way.
Yeah.
And that came as a result of interviewing pilots, a lot of them.
Were these in the main military pilots, or was it just a general mix at that time?
General mix. I think there were more commercial pilots, actually, because we were testing volunteer commercial pilots in our flight research in simulators.
But was there one specific incident that you can recall that set you on this trail, if you like, of making damn sure that when the opportunity arises, you can have a quick word with those pilots, and then if necessary, if the pilot's conducive to your line of questioning, do a lengthier study on a particular incident and the like?
Yeah, well,
was there one thing that stuck out?
I wish I could say yes, but my conversion was slow and gradual, because I'm a skeptical, kind of a stubborn person.
Yeah.
And I had to let the data speak for itself, and the data came in bits and pieces. So it isn't any one case, although there are many spectacular single cases that I've looked at. It's the constellation. It's the message that is embedded in many, many high-quality cases from pilots. As I fly commercial around the world, I try to make it a point to talk with the flight crew, both the flight attendants in the back and the flight crew up front. And I must say that I'm getting about 15 to 20%.
Really?
Roughly 1 out of 5 people I talk with say yes, they've had a strange sighting. That doesn't mean that it's a, quote, traditional UFO, but it's something they couldn't identify.
Yeah.
And with their experience, that's significant, you see. I will share one that took place over Lake Michigan on an L-1011 filled with passengers on July 4th, 1979, I think it was. I don't remember the year, very frankly, because I have so many. It's hard to remember them. But they were on autopilot at cruise altitude, cruise speed. The sun is above them and slightly behind them. And the captain told me, face to face, sitting in the cockpit of this airplane later on when we reconstructed the whole event, that he was sitting back in his seat with his hands behind his head, just, nobody's flying the airplane. It's flying itself.
Sure.
His co-pilot is turned in his seat looking behind him to the flight engineer talking about something. And the sky is blue and no cloud up ahead. Well, Captain Schultz told me that suddenly something caught his attention out to the left about 30 degrees of straight ahead and 30 degrees above the horizon. And so he concentrated on it, and he said it appeared very quickly, full size. It did not appear as a point and enlarge. That's important. He said it was as if the object had broken through the atmosphere, because as it appeared full size, little radiating lines seemed to appear like stress cracks. He took a paper napkin that he had in the cockpit, and he had me hold two corners, and he held two corners, and he pushed his thumb through the middle like he was demonstrating this effect. Well, he said, "What's that?" He thought he'd have a mid-air collision. He was quite concerned. His first officer turned in his seat and could see it. I talked to both of them and got the same story. The object was silvery, reflected sunlight the way polished metal would, came down in altitude to his altitude, did a high-speed turn, I calculated about 30 Gs, roughly, and about 1,000 miles an hour towards him, about 1,000 miles an hour going away in a climb, which is significant. And as it's leaving, it leaves a wispy, dark smoke trail behind it. He didn't see it coming. He said that he immediately radioed Milwaukee Center, Flight Traffic Control, and said, "Do you have any other traffic up here with us?" And they checked their radar and said, "No, we have nobody up here." And he didn't report it, obviously. I met a Soviet fighter pilot who'd retired by the time I met him. This was approximately 1995, 94 that I met him. And he came to Novosibirsk, where I was lecturing at the university there, to meet me from Chelyabinsk. And because he had this story to tell, and he couldn't find anyone to tell it to. And so I'd been there from America, and so he came over. Well, he was in a Czechoslovak two-place trainer, but he was alone in the cockpit, doing acrobatic training. It was a clear, sunny day, very cold, as you might imagine, in the Ural region. Well, he was doing acrobatic loops, vertical loops. And as he would come over the top and start down the other side, he was generally in the northerly direction. And the city of Chelyabinsk, which is about 1.5 million people, was to the north of him. And he said on three of these loops, and as he got to the top of this loop and looked almost level now in the northerly direction, here was a very long, grayish cigar just hovering out there in front of him. Well, he was flabbergasted. I mean, he was shocked. He doesn't speak a word of English, and so it was all in Russian. And he said to me that it didn't move, as far as he could tell. There was no background to compare, actually. But he was surprised it was above the city, because there was a lot of air defense at that time. This was before Perestroika. And he did 3 of these loops, and each time it was in the same place, and he radioed the field where he had taken off from, which was to the south and east of the city, quite a ways. "Do you have anything on radar?" And they checked, nothing on radar. So they said, "Come back and land. Don't stay up there." He had no weapons on board the plane. It was just a training flight. So he did. He immediately went back. As he's getting ready to land, which must have been 10 minutes later, approximately, he happens to touch his face. He's wearing a leather flight helmet, no goggles, so it's unexposed around his eyes, and an oxygen mask. He gave me the oxygen mask as a souvenir. He said, "I happened to touch my eye region and my nose above where it was protected, and I couldn't feel anything. I was anesthetized." And he used the Russian word for cork. He said, "My skin felt hard and puffy, and I had no sensation there, like cork." So he landed. He's getting a little concerned, right? Got out of the airplane, went right to the dispensary, to the doctor. The doctor examined him and said, "You have some sort of burns, skin burns."